All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Nikon TV. I'm Chris Ogonek, your host, and let's jump right in because today we are not doing an interesting read section at the end. We are not doing a getting to know your camera. We are not having an interesting guest person come on and teach us about photography or show some of their work off or talk about a product review. None of that is going to be happening. This episode is entirely devoted to the brand new announcements that we just made. Well, let's kind of get right into it. What are the announcements? Well, we announced obviously the Z5 with the 24 to 50. This is an entry-level full-frame camera. We'll be talking about all the specs there. We also introduced two teleconverters, both for the Z system, a 1.4 and a 2x teleconverter. And lastly, we actually came out with a development announcement for a webcam utility app that'll work for desktops. So let's kind of go through each of those, starting with the newest full frame entry-level camera that we have in our lineup, and it is the Z5. So this Z5 is really interesting for a lot of reasons to me personally, but the biggest ones are really how much of the Z6 and the Z7 are actually crammed into this camera. It's really kind of impressive because when a lot of people think of an entry-level mirrorless product or an entry-level camera in the full frame realm, they really kind of start to think about, okay, well, how much am I losing? What do I have to give up? And they've probably already made a checklist of the things that are important to them, and they kind of expect to have to give up half, 2/3 of the list to get into that entry-level price point. But the amazing thing about the Z5 is how much of the Z6 and Z7 are in here. So let's talk about a few of the major things. First, when it comes to an entry-level camera, a lot of people maybe didn't expect to have IBIS, but we have the same 5-axis in-body VR stabilization system that we have with the Z6 and Z7 found in the Z5. So this means that with any of the native Z lenses, you get up to 5 stops worth of compensation. You have 5-axis worth of compensation as well. You can obviously use it for with any of the F-mount lenses as well by using an FTZ adapter on there. When you do that, you get 3-axis worth of compensation. So it's an amazing system, whether you're shooting stills or video, to really be able to get the most out of your shooting, having that in-body stabilization work for any lens that you put on the body. Now, having IBIS is key, but personally, when I was making the transition into mirrorless when we came out with the Z6 and the Z7, the biggest hurdle that I expected, because I'd used previous mirrorless cameras that are out in the market, I had kind of tried to see what worked, what didn't work, and the biggest hurdle for me, and I think a lot of people felt the same way, is going from a DSLR, having that amazing optical viewfinder. You really get that natural feel as you're actually shooting. And the biggest hurdle for a lot of people is getting a natural, realistic looking EVF that mimics somewhat what they're used to with an optical viewfinder. And this 3.6 million dot resolution EVF you have in the Z5 is the same size and it's the same resolution as what you're getting with the Z6 and the Z7. So we absolutely did not skimp when it came to that EVF. And it is one of the largest and the highest res for that kind of entry-level mirrorless product when you look at what else is out there. So really, really impressive that if you have, let's say, a Z6 or a Z7 and you've fallen in love with that EVF, you know how good it is. It's not just the dots, not just the pixels that we put in the screen. There's a lot that goes into the actual optics. So when you do look through it, it is very natural, very realistic looking, and you're getting that same Nikon optics. You're getting the same resolution that you would from the Z6 and Z7. So for me, that's a huge, huge benefit with the Z5 is that you pick it up and it's the exact same quality that you're used to with the higher end products. Now, when you do pick up the camera, obviously you will be looking through the EVF. That will make a big difference. But the actual body design as well as hugely important. I was a little bit worried that for an entry-level mirrorless product that the body might be a little bit smaller, wouldn't be as comfortable to hold, but that's not the case at all. Size, weight, it's almost identical to a Z6 and a Z7. So you have a dedicated AF on button on the back, something that you really don't expect to see on entry-level products very often. You have the dedicated AF on button. You have the 8-way joystick control on the back. You have the same function 1, function 2 buttons. So if I put this into your hands right after you had picked up a Z6 or a Z7, you would not be able to tell the difference just by the ergonomics, how the camera actually feels. And that can actually be really key because if obviously we do expect a lot of people who are shooting, let's say in the DX world with a crop sensor, jumping into their first mirrorless camera and making it a full frame camera. That kind of is where the Z5 lies. But I probably expect a lot of people to use this as a second body, whether it's for like a D850, but also for a Z6 and Z7. So if you already have a Z6 and Z7 and you're used to the entire button layout, how you have the camera lined up, you can go and copy those exact settings to the Z5 and have it function almost identically to the higher end cameras. So really, really impressive that it all pretty much works the same. The only big difference on the body design that is different is the fact that the top command dial here, the mode dial on top, is where the top LCD panel is usually on the Z6 and the Z7. So other than the top of the camera, everything else is pretty much the same, and that goes for the battery. So this still uses an ENEL15 battery, or a variant of the ENEL15, I'll say, because while it still will work with an ENEL15, an A, and a B, this actually ships with an ENEL15C battery. So this variant has a little bit more power actually in the battery itself, so you will find you get a little bit more shots per charge or video clips per charge when you use the C, but it is still fully backwards compatible with the older batteries as well. And the nice thing is that this ENEL15C works with all the other cameras as well. And we were able to do that by keeping the size and weight of the camera still at a comfortable level so that not only you could hold it and it felt ergonomically correct, but that we could still use that same ENEL15 battery. Now, finishing off the talk of the body itself, because this is an entry-level product, like I mentioned, we're going to be having people with, let's say, D55, 5600, maybe even D7000 level customers jumping into full frame for the first time. The memory card that they're used to is an SD card. So we're using SD cards for the Z5, but because the body is still, hasn't been shrunk down to some uncomfortable level, you actually have dual SD cards in this camera, which for some people, when they want to have that kind of the peace of mind, knowing that they can go and shoot backup, they can shoot overflow, they can shoot RAW to one, JPEG to the other, you can do that completely with the Z5. Now, what else didn't I talk about? Oh, two extra little things. One, the hybrid autofocus system. So the autofocus system in the Z5 is the same as what you're getting with the Z6. So that means you're having 273 on-sensor phase detect points with essentially a 90% coverage both in the horizontal and the vertical directions, which means pretty much anywhere your subject is, you can go and track them. You're also getting out of the box, the camera ships with it, no need for any firmware updates, eye detect and animal detect AF. So all of the newest goodies, all the newest technology that you kind of hope to get with a brand new camera, you absolutely get with the Z5. Now, one last thing I kind of forgot when talking about the battery. So when we came out with the ENEL15B, with the Z6, the Z7, a couple other cameras, you're able to, with that ENEL15B in it, you're able to take a USB-C cable, plug it in, and actually charge the battery while it's in the camera. Well, for the Z5, this is a first for Nikon. Not only can the ENEL15C be charged when it's in the camera as well, but if you actually go and plug in a USB-C cable with the compatible cables and chargers, either into a wall or into a portable battery pack, you can go and use the camera while it's being powered by those external sources. So you don't have to rely on the pure battery life the entire time you're shooting. So if you're shooting videos and you want extra long battery life, or if you're shooting time lapses, really long time lapse, let's say, and you want to make sure, guarantee that you have enough battery life, you can now go and use a compatible USB charger, plug it into the camera, and you're all set to go. Now, that's the body itself. But I don't know if you guys have noticed this tiny, tiny little itty bitty lens that I have on the front here. This is the new kit lens that's shipping with as an option for the Z5. So this is a 24-50 f4 to 6.3 lens, and it is absolutely tiny. Now, this is a 24-70 f4 this is, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest kit lens ever that's been put out. And I've never heard anybody really complain about it being too big or too heavy, but look at the size difference. It is absolutely unbelievable how much smaller this 24-50 is than the already compact 24-70. So very small and much lighter as well. It's over 200 grams lighter than what the 24-70 f4S lens is. So really small, really compact, and when you put it onto this body, it really makes a hugely compelling case to take this as a travel camera, because you can literally throw this in any bag and you don't have to worry about it because it will so easily fit. Now, obviously, it's small, it's light, but what about the image quality? Because to be totally honest, this is a full frame camera. People expect not only great sensor image quality, but also quality from the lenses as well. So we know that people are going to be very picky when they get into the full frame realm, and this 24-50 does not disappoint at all. I've been doing, excuse me, I've been doing a bunch of testing with this lens over the last couple weeks. I've been comparing it against the 24-200, the 24-70 f4S lens, and also the Z24-70 f2.8 S lens as well. And I gotta tell you that this lens, the more ways that I try and trip it up, that I try and come up with tests to really show where it lacks, I'm being more and more impressed by the lens. It is absolutely spectacular how good this lens truly is. And it really shouldn't be surprising to a lot of people. Obviously, we started with the 24-70 f4S lens that really kind of blew people's socks off when they really pushed it and tried to see how good the quality was. But we also followed that up with the DX 16-50 lens as well, which obviously really surprised people with how small and light it was, but the optical quality was fantastic as well. 24-50 follows in those same footsteps. So this to me is a really awesome little package. Entry-level full frame into the mirrorless world. I think it's going to be really, really interesting for a lot of people who are just getting into mirrorless, just getting into full frame. But I do expect a lot of people who are shooting this as a kind of a backup camera to really kind of jump into this as well. Now, what are the differences between, let's say, a Z5 and a Z6? There's really only two. On the still side, we're really looking at the continuous frame rate. So this can do 4.5 frames a second with autofocus and exposure. The Z6 can do 5.5 frames per second with autofocus and exposure in the normal continuous drive mode. If you kick it into continuous high though, that will get you up to 12 frames a second with autofocus and exposure. So this does not have a continuous high option. So if you are shooting a ton of sports, a ton of action, where you are always pushing the camera to shoot at a much faster frame rate, then the Z6 does have a little bit of an edge. But for most people shooting portraiture, shooting landscapes, even the occasional wildlife or action shots, this camera will do absolutely amazingly. The other big difference between them is the actual video capabilities. This one still can shoot at full 1080p at 24, 30, and 60 frames a second. It can shoot 4K at 24 and 30 frames a second, but there is a crop on the 4K. So there's a 1.7 times crop, and you do not have the 120 slow motion options that you get with the Z6 and the Z7. You also don't have the extended, I'll say the more pro features, such as 10-bit recording. You can't shoot N-Log, and you cannot get the paid firmware to allow this to shoot raw video, as what you can do with the Z6 and the Z7. So other than that, you're pretty much getting a lot of what the Z6 and Z7 has in a very similarly sized and ergonomically designed body. Oh, by the way, the body and the lens, fully weather sealed as well, the same as the Z6 and the Z7. Partial magnesium alloy chassis on the Z5 as well, on the top and the front cover. The rear cover is our carbon fiber thermoplastics blend that we have. So that's a little bit different than the Z6, but it still adds a ton of rigidity. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. All right, so that's the Z5 and the 24 to 50, those two lenses, those two products that we just announced. The next two that I'll be talking about are the Z teleconverters. So these Z teleconverters, we have a 2x teleconverter, and then we have a 1.4x teleconverter. These will only work on Z lenses, but currently they'll only actually work on the Z70 to 200 2.8 when that lens does start to ship. Now, these lenses obviously are going to, in the future, have way more compatible lenses as we do kind of really push out more Z lenses. But right out of the gate, they will be usable with the 70 to 200 2.8. Now, obviously, with the 1.4, you'll lose one stop worth of aperture, so it'll go from an f2.8 to an f4. And then with the 2x teleconverter, it'll obviously extend you out to a 400 millimeter equivalent, and you'll go to an f5.6. So obviously 280 mil and 400 mil, that's what a lot of people think of the reasons to buy a teleconverter. You're extending that reach of your existing lens. But there is another kind of cool reason to use teleconverters, and that's you actually are able to get better macro capability. Now, I'm not talking true one-to-one macro capabilities such as you'd get with a 105 or a 60 mil lens, but you do get much closer. So out of the box, the Z70 to 200 gives you about a 0.2 times magnification ratio, which is decent. But when you put the 1.4 times teleconverter on there, you get to a 0.28 times magnification ratio, really kind of pulling that subject a little bit closer. And when you put the 2 times teleconverter on there, it brings it up to a 0.4 times magnification ratio. So it really gets you a lot closer to your subject matter, because a lot of people don't necessarily think about it, but you're increasing the effective focal length, getting out to, let's say, 400 mil, but you're not changing the minimum focusing distance. So that minimum focusing distance stays the same while your effective focal length has increased. So that means that you're able to essentially magnify your subject to be a little bit larger in the frame. All right, so Z5, 24 to 50, teleconverter 1.4 and a 2 times teleconverter for the Z system. We had one last announcement that we made, and this was for a webcam utility. So this will be coming at some point in the future. There was a development announcement for it, not an actual app that you can go and download right now. So this is going to allow you to plug in most of our Nikon cameras into your desktop and allow you to use the cameras directly as a webcam without having to go get an HDMI little device, or without having to buy a third-party software that will use the USB stream. This, you just plug in the USB cable into your camera, into your computer, and you'll be able to use the camera as a webcam. So obviously with times like they are right now, that is very key, being able to get as much high quality as you can. I've done multiple videos on how to live stream with your Nikon camera. You can check those out, but this is just an added bonus that we're hoping a lot of people will take advantage of. Oh, all right, so that was a lot we just went through there. A new camera, a new lens, 2 new teleconverters, development announcement for a new piece of software. There's a lot happening in the Nikon realm right now, and I hope you guys are as excited about them as I am. For the next episodes, as always, make sure write down in the comments below, because I do definitely check them, what you want to hear about future getting to know your camera episodes. Do you want to learn about a feature in the camera? Do you want to learn about what the buttons do? Last episode I talked about what the buttons and switches on our Nikkor lenses do, whether it's the VR switch, the AFM, can't talk. All of those switches I talked about, and I got those directly from a comment on our video. So make sure that you let me know if you want to know anything about getting to know your camera, and I will definitely go through that on a future episode. So until that next episode, make sure you guys stay safe, and I'll see you next time.